So we're going to kick off this week's episode of Cage Side Casual. We're looking at Monday, August 16th of 2021. And this past Saturday, we did not have fights. And I think that can be our first topic this week because it's almost a rare occurrence now that we don't have a fight card, whether it's a fight night, a pay-per-view. Um, it's so awesome that almost every weekend we can have quality fights. And with the fight nights, maybe it's one or two fights that we really care about that are going to have title contention, ramifications with them. And then pay-per-view, you're looking at the whole main card stacked of fights that you're dying to see. What do you think about the current place of these fights?
Yeah, I think this is just really the golden era of the UFC, and it's really awesome to see. It feels like they're no longer relying on those one or two monster pay-per-views each year. I feel like for the longest time, like at least when I first started watching, they would really, really lean on that Brock Lesnar or Ronda Rousey pay-per-view, and that seemed like the one that would get all the attention. And obviously McGregor took the UFC by storm, but it really feels like the pandemic and onward marked like a new chapter for the UFC. Like the product overall, I think just having the no fans for a while, I think it made the sport a lot more intimate, and you could just really like hear what was happening, hear what was going on. And I think I don't have the numbers in front of me to like back it up, but I think it's more popular than it's ever been. And I would say that not having like a season and just having something on every single weekend is huge for them. It's just so they're constantly pumping out content. And, even if we tend to think of sports just from like the context of America, like it's huge across the globe still too. So I think they're really doing a good job just building up like fighters who are traditionally unknown. I feel like there's a lot more household names, and yeah, like I said, there's not that one or two mega card each year that they need, and they can just put out consistently solid cards. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, the sport's been, I'll say, growing, but not on a large scale for, 20, 30 years now, and becoming formal enough that there's more and more gyms that are practicing each of these different disciplines. And that means there's so many more talented guys. Each division is stacked, and Dana always talks about it, the best fight the best. And I mean, when you think about competition, you can look across sports in general. You can think about the longer season sports. You might have a hockey or a baseball, but people aren't going to tune in to watch any given night of a baseball game. They're not exciting. I mean, it's the clear knock on it. Personally, I love watching the NFL, but the season feels like it lasts not long at all. Maybe a quarter of the year. And like you said, there is no season here. Almost every Saturday we're tuning in. They're getting quality events, and it's crazy to think that this is probably just going to only keep getting better and better. People want to see this product.
Yeah, I think it's really just become. It used to be sort of set apart from other sports. It was sort of the stepchild. It was the guys were a lot more viewed as fighters and less as athletes. I think the sport as a whole has really taken a turn, and people just view it more as a sport now and not just cage fighting. It's mainstream. It's trending on Twitter every Saturday night when there's a big fight. I really think it's John Anik replacing Mike Goldberg. In some ways, the hardcore fans didn't love that, but having like the dynamic duo of Anik, Cormier, and Rogan for the big events, and even the smaller events, Bisping, Hardy, Dominic Cruz, it just feels like such a much more polished product now, and it's just, I think it's going to continue to grow. And you just look at when they post free fights on YouTube,
They go bananas.
3 million views on a card or a fight that was just not really, wasn't like a McGregor fight.
Right.
It's so popular, and I think its integration with like ESPN as well is really helping it to get to the next level. And I do wonder if it's going to be on Fox like on Sundays consistently competing with like the big sports, or what their future plans are. But right now it feels like they're really just holding their own and a part of the conversation of mainstream sports.
And I think they've found a really good way of kind of teasing audience to bring in new members, but also give you some free content there, to your point, where you can watch either the early prelims or the regular prelims on ESPN. You don't have to have any special ESPN Plus or pay-per-view, obviously, And you can catch a couple of good fights if you're flipping through the channels, and that might be enough to make you say, wait a minute, I kind of want to see a little more. These aren't even the good guys yet. And you work your way up because that's even the way through the pandemic where I wasn't watching a ton of UFC. I think they had the whole card for the fight night on ESPN for Oliveira versus Kevin Lee. That was one of the first fights that I kind of had on in the background, and I'm like, holy crap, this Oliveira guy's throwing flying knees and all these crazy moves. The next thing you know, I see another big card coming up, and I'm, you know what, I'll buy a pay per view for the first time. And to your point, they're putting these free fights on YouTube all the time, and you get to see these classic fights over and over. And I'll try to be a historian. I'll try to see all these fights that happened in the past, and I'll look them up on YouTube, and I wonder who won that, or was this person at a different stage in their career? There's so much to learn. There's so much quality to go around, and it's always in your face. So the stage of or the place the sport is in is always going to keep getting better and better from everything they're doing to build it.
Yeah, I think they do a really good job at maintaining sort of like there's the classic boxing pay per view model, old school, but they're really I think they get like where the trends are going. They're posting on TikTok.
Yeah.
Uh, they're posting, like we said, the free fights on YouTube consistently. They understand that you just need to put out content nowadays. You can't just rely on a $75 pay per view
Right.
twice a year. It has to just be a constant. You have to be in people's eyeballs 24/7 nowadays. I think they're doing a great job at adopting to that, even though it is sort of like an old school model, like the fight game. So
That is an interesting point, though, about like the differences with boxing, because we all know boxing. When you get your first loss, you can be kind of out of the picture in a heartbeat. And Dana's normalized losing. I mean, you look at the divisions. Almost every champion has a loss on their record. Actually, I think they almost all of them. Yeah, I think they all do now. And
except for
that's
I think Usman's the only.
he has a loss in one of his first fights. It wasn't in the UFC. We can check that later, but I'm pretty sure. I can see you typing away. But yeah, I mean, losing is normal. There are some champions that don't lose often. I know Adesanya just got his first loss trying to jump up a weight class, and he said dare to be great after, and he did. But he also understood that his legacy wasn't going to be broken by that. In the same way you look at Floyd Mayweather and people tuning in to try to see him lose. But I mean, we talk about Poirier. He's one of the best fighters, but he has what 6 losses maybe on his record. We don't lose a ton of respect for these guys after a loss. And when you have so many talented guys, you're not going to emerge the victor every single time, and it doesn't take away from the quality of the product or the perception as a fan that you have for it.
Yeah. Actually, that it really goes in line with what we're saying in terms of the just putting out constant content, and because they're always putting on fights, they're not relying on one guy anymore. They're not relying on one Mike Tyson type figure like Brock Lesnar or something. I think part of that could also just be Dana White having a little bit of an ego and just not wanting anyone to be bigger than the UFC. But in boxing, there's 4 popular names, and you could argue the same thing for the UFC, but they don't need those people to fight. They'll still put on fights. They can make money and grow their business without
Totally.
having to grow and groom a champion and hope that they never lose or have one loss ruin their entire reputation. I think Dana White's actually done a really good job at sort of like you said, normalizing losses, but also putting on main events that are just fun fights, like the BMF belt.
Yeah.
I think the UFC 10 years ago wouldn't have made a belt for that. They wouldn't have probably made that like a pay-per-view main event, but they get that Nate's popular, that Jorge's popular, and they're willing to do things like that now and just adapt rather than just be classic and traditional like I think they were for many years.
Yep. And I think one last point here, we talk about the success of the UFC through the pandemic. John Jones, one of the best fighters, did not fight once through the entire pandemic. McGregor didn't fight until the following January, which is Poirier won. So we talk about some of the biggest names that weren't even fighting, and it still grew exponentially in the way that it did. Truly incredible state of the fight game here.
Yeah,